Okay, hi everybody and welcome to today's session. I'm Scott Engel. I'll be your moderator today for the Jewish Journeys class. My wife Julia, who maybe some of you see in the middle of your screen, and our daughter Eva and my mom had belonged to Rod of Shalom for 12 years and we really enjoyed being members. And we miss seeing so many of you and all of you, frankly, all of this time, but hopefully we'll be together again soon. We have a fantastic agenda for you today, and I'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But before we do that, a few housekeeping items. Today's session will last for 75 minutes and it will end at 5:45. The Zoom room will remain open until 6 p.m. for anyone interested in optional continued conversation. Today's class is being recorded. If you wish not to be recorded, please turn off your video now. The class will also utilize closed captioning. If you wish to, feel free to add your pronoun to your on-screen name. And those of you that are participating with multiple participants, I see Len and Alice, great, you're both on the screen together. If there are multiples, please add all of your names just to complete your Zoom name. If you have questions or comments during today's presentation, please consider making some notes and we'll do the very best we can to address all of it at the end. I will keep an eye on hand raising, electronic hand raising during the session as well, and we'll do what we can, but we'll try to get through this and offer commentary at the end. Today's class addresses Jewish journeys and how these specific Rod of Shalom members arrived at where they are today in their journey. Let me just say that you're about to hear some incredible stories. I recently heard a podcast by a conservative rabbi who said something that resonated with me. He said, a Jew is born a Jew, is always a Jew, even if they explore other religions, even if they consider themselves purely cultural Jews, or even if they're agnostic. I was both surprised and pleased to hear this from him. He went on to say that other religions sometimes say that if you're not a believer every single day or through certain life cycles, you're no longer a part of that faith. But being Jewish is familial. You're always a member of the Jewish family, regardless of where you are in your journey. I want to thank each presenter today and commend them for their openness in telling some very personal stories. Our presenters today, in the order of their appearances, will be Michael Riccardi, Gail Malka Meister, Alice Sayles, Len Sayles, and Seif Sekalala. We're most grateful for our tech angel, Vivi Charlap, who joined RS in August during the pandemic and who we look very much forward to meeting in person in the very near future. If you're having any transmission issues or any issues with being on this program, you can direct those to Vivi by way of a private chat. Rod of Shalom cares equally about Jewish learning and creating profound connections. Our participating fellow ARS members came from very diverse backgrounds, and it's their life experiences that make them so individual and diverse. But with that, they all share a common thread that we all do, and that is tikkun olam, to repair the world and find our own profound connection to Judaism and to Rod of Shalom. Vivi will now present our prayer for study, which I will lead. Feel free to unmute if you wish, or you can just recite the prayer while you remain muted. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of all, who hallows us with commanding us to engage with the words of Torah. Thank you, Vivi. Here's how today's session will be structured. Each panelist will share their story for up to 10 minutes. There will be time at the end for final comments before we open up for questions and comments from you, our participants. The stories being shared today are quite personal, and I'm grateful for the confidence that our members have in talking about them. That being said, there is no right or wrong, and everyone's feelings are valid. Please treat sensitive information with sensitivity and confidentiality that is deserving of it. Before we begin, though, I'd like to briefly share my own story because, unlike our panelists, I was able to take being Jewish very much for granted. I was raised conservative in Philadelphia, and I loved the music and rituals when I was young. And like so many others, it all came to a stop right after my bar mitzvah. As the years went on, however, I recognized a bit of a void. And however, for approximately 30 years, I didn't go to synagogue, no Shabbat, no bat mitzvahs, high holy days, nothing. But yet I did feel very Jewish inside. I was simply bored by the process, I would say, of the conservative movement, and I needed to find something else. In the early 1990s, when I was in my 30s, I felt an emptiness watching my Society Hill neighbors going to Society Hill Synagogue on the 400 block of Spruce. I knew something was missing in my life, but I just could not be specific to it. By the mid-90s, I started going alone to Penn Hillel's Reform High Holy Day services. I loved the message and I loved the music. And I thought to myself, now this I like. Around 2010, there was a series of events that changed my views as I began to evolve. The son of a dear friend and child who I knew from birth was in a car accident and suffered a traumatic brain injury for which he later died. I was quite distraught about the entire incident, and I went and spoke with a conservative rabbi who had a very hippie-ish nature, I would say, about him, and he was a very spiritual, soulful guy. And he said something to me that I never forgot. And he said that God is not this all-present in the sky pulling the strings of our lives. And he explained to me more of what Judaism meant and what Judaism was all about. And frankly, it was the first time I'd ever heard it presented in that way. And it resonated with me. Julie and I met a couple traveling a number of years ago who were active members at a place called the Shul of New York. And it was, as I call, the Baptist church version of a synagogue. These folks were high-spirited, fantastic music and orchestra, and I mean, they were hopping on Shabbat. But it was the sweetness of their members and the message that resonated so much. And I felt my sense of returning to full-on Judaism really at my fingertips. We then joined Rodef Shalom, and there I found a place that truly felt like home to me. I remember early on Rabbi Kuhn saying that if you can be grateful for 10 things every day, you will never have a bad day. And I believe that. I try to practice it. I don't do it all the time, but I do remember the notion of gratitude. And I love the notion of gratitude because it's a wonderful thing for people who look to Judaism in their own flavor of Judaism, as I like to call it. I learned what it means to be Jewish and practiced Dor Lador with my family and with my congregation. I now see myself as part of a 225-year chain, that is Congregation Rodef Shalom. If you saw my bio, I wrote in there that everything I needed to know about life, I learned in a Jewish delicatessen. However, I have to add to that being a member of the Rodef Shalom community has helped me to be a far more rounded person. One of my most profound and proudest events as a Jew and as a member of Rodef Shalom was with Rabbi Eli when we ran an event at the American Museum of Jewish American History on Market Street. And it was our group from Rodef Shalom as well as an evangelical and Muslim group, and we all met there together. And I had a group with me of mostly evangelicals. And they started talking to me about what does God, what is God? What is it you pray to? And what I said was, to me, God is right here between us right now. God is filling us right here, right now. And we are having a God-like experience. And they loved that notion. They loved it. And they left there that day with a completely new vision of what is Judaism and who are Jewish people, just as I had a far better understanding of who they were and what they were all about. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience with people very different from me, very different backgrounds, for which I don't know that I might have otherwise had an opportunity to meet. It was a magical experience. Let's begin. I'd like to open up with, there's Mike Riccardi. Mike and I met, I guess, some 12 or so years ago when our kids all started at Merkaz Limud, and one of our favorite people to see at the congregation. So, Mike, I'm going to leave it with you. You have to unmute yourself.
Got it.
There you go.
Scott, it's a pleasure to have you as the moderator, because I'm going to start this story with a I'm going to start this story by describing a day that I'm pretty sure you were also at shul that day, because it was a morning where our kids were at Merkaz Limud together. I think it was 2010. Professor Lila Berman Corman, who's often lectured with us, was doing an adult education session titled Jewish Geography. Jewish geography as a game can be fraught if you weren't born Jewish. Being asked where you went to camp or where you were bar mitzvahed can be problematic. But her lecture instead focused in that first session on the story of Jacob's journey when he was fleeing from his brother Esau. This was already among my favorite stories from the Hebrew Bible. We had named our youngest son Jacob. If you remember, Jacob falls asleep with his head on a rock, and in his dream encounters the ladder where angels ascend to heaven and descend to earth. And there he has an encounter with God. He names the place Bethel, literally God's house. I was thinking about it and thought Bethel is basically the middle of nowhere with nothing but a rock to lay one's head on. Not only was it no place special, it was no place at all. For me, the takeaway was that you can connect with the eternal and the ultimate in the most unexpected places. For me, that place that day was the Weiss study. After that lecture, I walked out the door and Rabbi Joe Maderer was standing in front of me. And it was in that moment that I asked her on the spot about studying to become a Jew for real. That moment wasn't the beginning of my journey, though. It was more like the culmination of a life spent in proximity to Judaism. I'm an adoptee from the period where girls were swept away from homes to give birth in secret and give up their babies. It was called the era of the baby scoop. You can Google those words and find that I was born in 1962 in the heart of it. While I know a few things about my birth mother, she wasn't Jewish. There's no accessible record of lineage on the other side. I was adopted into a nominally Catholic family. We celebrated Christmas and Easter. But I was always a bit displaced and distanced. Catholicism made a very light impact on me through a few good teachers who emphasized the social justice aspects. But as to me, it became more and more reduced to a politics I couldn't follow. Catholicism was a non-starter to me. Meanwhile, I was drawn to the Shabbat rituals, holidays, and food of folks who lived close to me. My nanny, when I was a very little boy, would light the candles, and I would have dinner with her often. I liked growing up in Northeast Philadelphia, a neighborhood where Judaism was a vital part of the scene. It was part of the air you breathed, and some older folks spiced their sentences with Yiddish. And I always had an invitation to a Passover Seder. Fast forward to my adulthood, I became truly Jewish adjacent when I met when I was at a bar and met a girl who had a necklace with 2 stars of David on them. We later got married. She didn't have a bat mitzvah, lived much of her life in Senegal and Singapore, where her father was stationed as a diplomat and an executive. So her connection to Judaism was in some ways attenuated. We only made a vague decision to form a Jewish family, but had really very little idea of how to do so. and it's there that Rodef Shalom enters the picture. When our first son was born and we were planning his brit, we felt we needed kippot in the house. And the only place I felt comfortable calling was Rodef, and Catherine Fisher invited me in and gave me a basket full of kippot. We had friends at Rodef, and for 10 years, um, we were prospective members and then members, and uh, I felt very embraced. No one knew that I wasn't Jewish, um, um, but all the while I was learning about Shabbat and how to celebrate holidays, and more than that, what was in the Torah and what were the building blocks of Jewish values. Um, I guess, when I thought back on it, preparing these remarks, um, I think that the whole flow of my life, um, even the 40 something years where I wasn't officially a Jew, um, the flow of my life shaped me as much as I tried to shape it. Um, and my spiritual choices, when I formalized them, were fairly obvious and natural. So that day when I burst out of the lecture and asked uh, Rabbi Meister how I could study to become a Jew, was more, the culmination of a journey. Um, to this day, my approach to Judaism is evolving, um, thinking uh, what is kosher, what is the right way to approach food and ritual. Um, and I've had the ability to become a bit of a Jewish leader through service on almost on what feels like dozens of boards and committees and task forces here at Rodef Shalom. But that work has given me um, at least as much as I've put into it, because, as Scott mentions, uh, in those places, often the spark of connection um, appears between people. Uh, I can't imagine myself today not striving to live a Jewish life, not referring to Jewish values in major life decisions, and um, and I look forward to going back to what for me was Bethel, the house of God, the second floor of it, the Weiss study, where my Jewish journey became a real commitment. So thanks for listening. Happy to answer any questions. And thanks, Scott and Gail, for inviting me.
Mike, thanks for being a part of it. And, I love the idea that you're, doing work and serving on boards and things like that, because it is those things that, in my book, are part of Tikkun Olam. And I've always
Yeah.
been a believer that those of us who are able to help others, or I should say, to bring out the best in others, we ultimately bring out the best in ourselves. And you are, and you do. So thank you for all that you're doing. Thanks. Gail. Hi, Gail. You have to unmute. There we go.
So I feel both eager and reluctant to share my story with everybody. I'm proud of some things in the story and ashamed of others. There are probably also other things I can't see clearly enough to classify. What I do see when I think of my story is images. So thanks to my husband of almost 50 years, Greg Meister, who managed the technical end of this PowerPoint that I hope is going to appear on the screen at any moment by Vivi.
I'm sorry, one second. Okay.
Thank you. Next slide, please. Thank you. I was born in the baby boom after World War II and grew up on Long Island in suburban New York during the 50s and 60s. This is the town's public library. Next photo. Except for my first elementary school, I lived in a relatively Jewish context. On up through high school, there were so many Jewish students that the school district was forced to close on Jewish holidays, not any sort of philosophical commitment to multiculturalism, but because no kids came. My family belonged to a Reform congregation, Central Synagogue of Nassau County, not the one in New York City. And I completed what was then considered a full Reform Jewish education, from consecration to confirmation, and sang in junior choir. I inherited my family's taste for travel, fascination for the foreign, and curiosity about the novel. And here I am on my way to France for junior year abroad. A few years after college, I got engaged to Greg, was baptized, and converted to Christianity. How could I have done that? The overwhelming motivation was to be with Greg, and that's what it took. Love, youth, a sense of adventure, and freedom to explore whatever it was, it would not be denied. But it also was a lack of appreciation for what I was leaving and what I was called to embrace. I became a minister's wife. Greg was a good minister, and I was a good minister's wife. I was genuinely glad to greet the people and to participate in and promote the church enterprise. I loved the church people, and I believe I was loved by them. And from the church experience, I can say now I learned about personal prayer. They're not just words on a page. They can be personal and individualized. My return to Judaism was a process, not an event, of questioning and struggling for well over a year. It was as if a hat box, an old-fashioned container for a thing of the past, tucked away deep in the closet, held something now rattling back to life. Something in it insisted on coming forward and being acknowledged. Ironically, the examination of my beliefs came about partly through church classes and church pilgrimages to Israel. The meditations, reflections, and journaling in those experiences were designed to lead participants to deepen their Christian faith. But it led me to argue with parishioners in Bible study. It also led me to stop reciting and singing Christian words I did not believe. The tipping point came 9 years into our marriage. At funeral and Shiva services for my father in New York, I warily scanned the words in the prayer books, as I was then doing in church, but found there was nothing I didn't want to read or sing. This was the right stuff. I saw myself, alone, accountable to God, not hiding behind Greg's spirituality, but the essence of me, a blob of protoplasm on a garden bench, confronted by God. My conclusion, I was Jewish. For Greg and me, this ruptured and reshaped our marriage. I knew it posed a risk to our union and to Greg's livelihood, and I was so sorry, but I was trying to reconcile the two goods in my life, our marriage and my Judaism. How could it be that nurturing one harmed the other? I cried the whole 6-hour flight back home to San Francisco. Sitting at the kitchen table, I told Greg I could no longer be a Christian. I had to be Jewish. And Greg grimly offered a pledge to stick with our marriage. But as he put it, it was a bruised time in our relationship and in my life. I saw myself standing before a field of burning coals. The pain was here, and there would be more pain to go from here to there, wherever that was. And I was terrified and unwilling. I contemplated faking it outwardly to keep on as we had been, but I rejected that idea because I knew that inauthenticity would literally kill me. At the same time, I felt utterly compelled to cross over. So on the one hand, I was exhilarated. I told friends I was being propelled on the fast track of a spiritual journey. On the other hand, I was in despair. One night I whimpered to myself, the universe in my mind, what next? And to my surprise, a voice in my mind answered immediately, keep listening, genial, almost chipper, with a verbal wink. Back in the everyday world, I reached out for counsel and support. I continued to journal. Greg sent me to a synagogue, and I had to look up synagogues in the yellow pages. The rabbi there listened to me, and he was certain when I couldn't be, and I'm very grateful for that. My family and Greg's family were very supportive, as were the few church members we took into our confidence. I personalized the Torah portions that I had begun encountering each week. One example, I resonated to Moses' ultimatum to God in Exodus 33, a plea really more than a threat. If you don't come with us, don't send us. If you don't come with me on this journey, God, I cannot go. So I wanted to be Jewish, but discovered that I was very ignorant of the basics of Judaism. The Bible is called Tanakh. They're weekly designated Torah portions with associated Haftorah portions. The Torah is paraded around the sanctuary. There are Aliyah blessings before and after. Who knew? I set out to learn in order to experience meaning in Jewish practice I didn't yet know. I joined a very traditional but egalitarian conservative synagogue in San Francisco, where I attended Shabbat morning services every week and really studied and learned the service and followed the Torah portion word for word. When we moved back east a few years later, I joined another traditional egalitarian synagogue where I attended Friday night services every week. Every Saturday morning, however, I took field trips to different area synagogues, all denominations, all flavors. How did I get to RS? I visited RS on one of my field trips. And when I tried RS's Torah study, I simply could not stay away. My Jewish knowledge and practice have only grown since. Along with them have grown the richness of meaning and my joy in being Jewish. A postscript. Greg was tickled recently to learn that the Reform movement, next slide, please. The Reform movement would call him a Jewish adjacent, someone who is closely associated with the Jew but is not Jewish himself. What that means to him, how it has influenced his faith, his ministry, his profession, his experience of our marriage, is his story to tell for another time.
Thanks, Gail. What a great story. And you know, I commented earlier that when we come to synagogue pre-pandemic, how, you know, we have so many people that are dear to us and we greet them, but we really don't know their entire background and how they got to where they got to. And when Gail told me her story just a couple of days ago, I was riveted by it. I am still. It's an incredible story. And it goes to, if you're born a Jew, you're always a Jew because it's familial. And no matter where you are Jewish in your journey in life. Thanks, Gail. I want to move on now to Alice Sayles.
Hi, am I unmuted?
You are.
Okay. So my Jewish journey started with an argument with Len, which went on for a long time, over a year. I wanted to take bridge lessons, and my mother was an avid bridge player, and I was really feeling like we needed to learn how to play bridge. And Len wanted to attend a Torah class that he heard about at RS, and I had no interest in that at all. We finally settled the argument by saying, okay, we would both take one bridge lesson and both go to one Torah class, and then we would reassess the situation. And it's about 3 years later, maybe more, and we're still taking bridge lessons, still going to Torah class. I grew up, I can't see anybody else, I can only see myself. Is that the way it's supposed to be? I want to see.
Spotlighted right now.
I want to
So
see.
everybody sees you first.
Oh, good. Okay. I grew up in a Jewish home, but an atheist home. My mother, especially, was almost anti-religion, anti-organized religion. My father had some interest in Judaism, but he was rarely home. We did belong to a synagogue because I think he wanted a place to go for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But I never set foot in that synagogue. We never went. I never heard a Shabbat prayer. I never heard the word Shabbat. I guess we'd say Shabbos, maybe, but every year in the fall, my mother would take my sister and me to buy a new outfit and maybe a new coat. And that was for Rosh Hashanah so that we could go Rosh Hashanah morning to the synagogue and stand on the sidewalk outside for an hour and greet the neighbors. And then we'd go home and that was it. We did have some Passover seders that I remember, but my mother always put a rye bread out on the table next to the matzah. And I don't think we ever even got through the 4 questions. My mother would say the soup was getting cold and we would eat. So it became a food holiday. So to me, Judaism meant nothing. And the neighborhood that I grew up in, also on Long Island, as near Gail, maybe where Gail grew up, I felt that the emphasis was on clothes and appearance and making money and, what business you were in or something. I wanted to run away from it. I think I was anti-Jewish and not happy that I was Jewish. And I felt that I got nothing from it. And so when I went to college, I spent one summer in India on the experiment in international living. Oh, somebody's raising their hand. Somebody else did that. And I lived for a month with a Hindu family and a month with a Muslim family and loved that experience. Another summer, I worked with a Catholic priest in Brazil on a project building a school. I got involved in movements, civil rights movement, Vietnam movement. I lived in Berkeley for a year to work on the Vietnam protests. I think just always looking for meaning. And, but still not thinking that I wanted to be Jewish at all. I knew I was Jewish, but I didn't care. So when we went to the Torah class for the first time, I was very nervous. We read the Torah, parts of the Torah portion. I think Eli Friedman was conducting it. And there was talk about God speaking to Moses. And I thought, oh, this is such rubbish. It's just not what I believe. And I got up the nerve to raise my hand. And I said, I don't think I belong here because I don't believe in God. And I don't believe there's a God who speaks to Moses or anybody. And I thought Eli was going to say, well, thanks for coming, but goodbye. And he was so wonderful and said, no, you do belong here. And we welcome you. And there may be other people who feel the way you do. And the important thing is for us to talk about how we feel. And then I think 1 or 2 Torah sessions later, again, there was talk about the chosen people. And I hate that concept, still feel uncomfortable about it. And Rabbi Meister said, let's talk about the chosen people. And she led the most wonderful conversation about how every religion wants to feel that it's the best, that they're chosen, and how the children in every family, each child wants to feel that they're the most special. She made it somehow relatable to me. So I kept going. I kept telling myself, well, I don't really like this, but I'm getting the Jewish education I never had, so at least I'll find out what it means to be Jewish at some point. And I think I felt, and I still feel, that the Torah, even though it has the Torah study, the Torah stories, I feel that when I read them, they're ridiculous. Sometimes I'll feel like they have wisdom, they say good things, but many times I feel like this is just ridiculous. This is rubbish. I don't believe any of this. Then I'll go to the Torah session and we have the most wonderful conversations. And I think, how did that happen? And the only way I can figure it out is that the Torah, for some reason, somehow brings up the most important questions in life the meaning of life, what you do with suffering and regret and mistakes and loneliness and the need for community. I guess those are the important things. And I love the concept, the Jewish concept of struggle and arguing and talking. And I think that that does bring people closer together when they are all talking from their deepest feelings and their heart, if they're being honest. And so I've ended up feeling very close to the people who were in Torah class. I feel that it is a sense of community that I love. I still don't believe in God. I think life is very random and meaningless in many cases. And yet, and yet, and yet I look at the world and nature and the beauty out there and the miracle of life. And I do feel that there is something infinite, something bigger than we are that we'll never understand. And I'm in awe of that. But that's my story, I guess. I'm still, and I haven't said anything about the Psalms class that Ellen Poster told me about, but maybe that'll be for if there are any questions. I have started doing another class in New York City by Zoom on reading the Jewish Psalms. And that's a whole other story. I'll stop talking. I think I've gone 8 minutes, have I? I'll stop.
No, that was great, Allison. You know what? I mean, I've gone off and on to Torah study, but I, like you, really couldn't get much meaning out of it. But not only is the Torah study group unique, but we are so fortunate to have the clergy that we have.
Yes.
They can put something spiritual and purposeful to those lessons. And it's pretty profound. I think that that's what allows us to move forward as Jews, and because ultimately we're the Jewish family, and you're born a Jew, you're always a Jew. And no matter how you navigate that, you are still always a Jew. So,
well, I thought I was a Zen Buddhist for a long time, but anyway, yeah, I'm getting back there. Thanks.
well, thanks for your comments. Len?
Well, listening to everyone else, I feel like my journey, if that's the right word for it, is somewhat less eventful, except when I was probably 10 or 11. And just by way of background, my parents grew up in Jewish homes in Brooklyn. My father actually was born in Russia and was 10 when he came here. So the only language that my parents spoke at home, I mean, that's the home that I grew up in, but with their parents was Yiddish. And you would have thought that with that background of Judaism, that there would have been no question in my mind or anyone's mind that I would have been raised as Jewish, but that was not to be. My mother, at some point before I have any memory, and I'm sure before she married my father, became a Christian Scientist. I think it was more a turning away from being considered Jewish in the 30s and early 40s than religious experience on her part. But I was in this position where my mother was going to Christian Science church, and she would drag me along, I guess is the word I feel. And my father, I knew, was very upset about that. And I just remember having this great conflict. Not so much, it wasn't religious conflict. I didn't really have the concept of God and Judaism, Christianity, but it was more of conflict with my parents and picking what parent I wanted to follow. And I was much closer to my father. So really about the age of 11 or 12, when I got close to having to study for bar mitzvah, and I clearly, from that point on, never thought myself as anything but Jewish. My mother, who died at 101, not with my father by a few decades, continued to consider herself to be a Christian Scientist. And yet, this is sort of diverging from me, but by way of background, there is an Orthodox synagogue in Brooklyn that she donated the funds for that bears her name. So, I mean, talked about being mixed up. I think that was the background I was in. I went to synagogue with my father on the High Holy Days. I didn't really embrace Judaism. I did it more out of respect for my father and to make him feel like, I was following him. When I went to Penn, there was Hillel, and my friends and I would go to Hillel for the High Holy Day services when we didn't go home. I'm second marriage, of course. I married a woman who was bar mitzvah, the first one in her synagogue. And I sort of assumed, that would be the path that I would follow. But we got divorced. And I remember I was really in the sort of depths of, I wouldn't call it depression, but, not knowing, just didn't know. I felt adrift, I guess, because we're in the middle of the divorce. I was moving to the Philadelphia area. My wife, my ex-wife to be, and the children were in New York, and what was I doing? And I joined Road of Shalom Synagogue in New York City. Very similar to this one, I think, perhaps in religious philosophy. And I remember one High Holy Day service, somehow or another, I started doing some introspection, and I can't remember exactly what it was all about, but somehow or another, I got solace out of it. Sense of peace, I suppose is the word. And I, moved down to this area, joined Road of Shalom Synagogue in Philadelphia and in the suburbs, actually. And they had a group called Singles Again. And I met my wife, Alice, there. And so that's a very good feeling I have about Road of Shalom and, what the benefits I've gotten from it. So we went to Road of Shalom for a while, but I think we sort of felt, or I felt, that it was really not a spiritual religious feeling at all. And I thought maybe if I went back to a conservative synagogue that would join Aleph Jeshurun, I would get the melodies and the traditions that to some extent I thought I missed, but that didn't really make me very happy either. And we also went to join Hillel and went to services there. And as Alice mentioned, we had the significant discussion about bridge and Judaism. And I really enjoy, I think that's the word for it. I really enjoy being Jewish. And Alice and I do have a difference of opinion about the concept of God. I think I'm much more in belief of that concept of something, some spirit, some ineffable entity that is that exists. Otherwise, I think life is sort of a farce. It doesn't sort of have any meaning. So I'm on a journey as to determine what that meaning is. And I'm actually reading that book by Jonathan Sachs to see if that helps. But I can't tell you I'm there yet. So that's my spigmatic journey through Judaism.
Thank you, Lynn. We're all on that journey, and I oftentimes just think about all the people who came in front of us at Road of Shalom. I oftentimes, when we're in the sanctuary, think to myself that there were people, it was us, who made a decision to build that building. Mm-hmm. And it's quite a thing to do, and just knowing that you are here today, you're going to do something better to expand and for the betterment of all. And it's a wonderful thing to be able to hang on to, no matter what that search is. But it is about the continuity of life and goodness and Road of Shalom, and especially in the world we live in now, that's for sure. So thank you. Hello, Seif. Seif Sekalala is our next speaker.
Hi, Scott. Hi, everyone.
Nice.
Can you all hear me well?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. I have some notes. I believe Vivian agreed to help me beam them, please, if you will. I don't have multimedia to share, like as Gail. Gail's display was wonderful. Gail, I really enjoyed it. It was beautiful. I don't have any, so I'm more vanilla, but it's just a one pager, like a one page of my notes. I thought it would be nice for everybody to follow along. So I guess I'll get right into it then. My name is Seif Sekalala. So just to dive right in, the spiritual journey, where did it start? For me to start the story, I have to go back to my childhood. And my childhood, the fact of it was, we were back in the day what the old-fashioned folks would call love children. my two sisters and I love children. My mom is a staunch Roman Catholic. Dad is a staunch Muslim, right? They met, fell in love. They really had to. They had to be together, and they had us, right? But really, they both felt very strongly about their religion, so they couldn't convert for each other. And so what that meant was that like I was born into a no man's land, kind of, right? A religious no man's land. Anyway, my primary school was, I went to Catholic school. So again, like I said, my mom is Roman Catholic. I did not grow up with my dad. I grew up estranged from my dad. My mom raised me, went to Catholic school, and I used to love it there. I loved it there. And being the fact that I was growing up with my mom, for a very long time, up until at least my teenage years, I thought I wanted to be a Catholic, right? Of course, my dad would never allow it, right? So in the fourth grade, the Ugandan curriculum was great when it came to religion because it was Christian centric, yes. However, we did cover the Old Testament, what the Christians call the Old Testament, for the first few grades. And so fourth grade was the book of Exodus, right? The Genesis and Exodus. And I don't know if everybody else went to like the Jewish version of Sunday school, learning about those stories, but it's a very dramatic story. The 10 plagues, my God, right? Like just let my people go, and Pharaoh doesn't want to do it, and then like the 10 plagues, and eventually Pharaoh relents and all that. And then the parting of the water, the parting of the sea for the Jews to cross, right? Oh my God, it was just awesome. And so I like to think that was the seed for me. But as most of us, and some of us have already alluded to, I grew up and teenagers and early adulthood years. Who cares about religion, right? I mean, you're having fun. You're whatever. You have that like that hubristic type mentality as a teenager and a young adult. Who cares? But over the years, I came to the United States. Fast forward into my adulthood. Came to the United States for college, in undergrad. I came when I was 18 when I got here, and one thing led to another. I did, undergrad and eventually grad school, and again, I'm a citizen now. I've been here for 17 plus years, but the question of spirituality came back to me because I tend to be a thinker. I love thinking, and part of my thinking is not just dedicated to like my academia and other things, other ideas. I also have a spiritual side to me, and um as some people have already mentioned today, there's like all this bad stuff in the world. When I was at Germantown Jewish Center, I asked the junior rabbi, the student rabbi, I asked him a question and he did not give me a good answer. I asked him, why did God let the Holocaust happen? If God is a good, kind, smart God, why do the bad things in the world happen that do, right? And so questions like that are why I came back to the religion, why I came back to spirituality, excuse me. And I believe in God so strongly, but I'm not sold on, Jesus of Nazareth being the Messiah. Um, I'm sorry, that was Uganda, East Africa. Okay, so Jesus being the Messiah or Muhammad or all because these other religions have these strong frameworks of like this, what I mean, and yes, we have Moses, right? Like we have the prophets, but for us, it's not like that. Anyway, I went to Germantown Jewish Center, and the rabbi there, Rabbi Adam, he just formally introduced me to the religion in terms of the pillars of the religion. He pointed out to me that for us, for Judaism, the three pillars are, in their order, community, behavior, and spirituality. That resonated. I started going to Shabbat services. I was welcomed for the most part, like just pretty much I was welcomed, right? And then what I love the most about Judaism is that for those of us that have mentioned that we're a little bit agnostic, or we have agnostic leanings, or even you might be an atheist, I think this is the friendliest. This religion is probably the friendliest for you out of all of them, because out of the Abrahamic religions, because we're allowed to question God, right? We're searching for truth always. We, like I like that metaphor of Jacob wrestling with that embodiment of God or God's representative, an angel, whatever. But that's a great metaphor. That's what we do in our lives. We search and we doubt and we ask and those are like ongoing questions that will always come back to. I don't think I followed a beaten or pre-constructed path as such, right? I think I'm just part of this community of like this timeless community of searchers of truth. We're all just searching for truth, Judaism, and maybe even other religions. But for us, it's like we've been for millennia, right? Since like the days of like before Common Era and then through today, we're just searching for truth. We want to do right. We want to live righteous lives. Uh, Over the course of the journey, and I'm still, the journey has not ended. I'm still in the journey. There's self doubts. Like a couple of the challenges that I face, among others. There's self doubt. There's an idea of what a Jew is supposed to look like, right? Like this, when you picture a Jewish person, man or woman, you picture like a certain race and a certain maybe whatever background and so and then I guess because of anti-Semitism, right? A lot of the Jews, every once in a while, I encounter Jews who, Jews by birth, who kind of they're fascinated. They're not. It's not racism and it's not bigotry, but they look at me like, I guess because of all the suffering the Jews go through, I guess they think to themselves, why would you want to join a community that's so reviled and that But for me, it's a deep, deep question of spirituality. So, and eventually I try to explain to them, and sometimes it resonates, and sometimes I don't know. Eventually, folks always get to know me and what I'm about, and they realize that what, I'm just like all the stories that have been shared today. Mine too is just a story of like being lost and just trying to find my way home, so to speak, my way to my spiritual home. So yeah, number 5, where to? I mean, yeah, where next after this? I have to keep studying. I have to keep studying the Torah. I have to keep studying the Talmud. I have to keep studying all this other, just, immerse myself further into the religion, the holidays and stuff. I've been missing out on the holidays because of the fact that because of the COVID and the fact that I'm married to a Christian woman, right? And eventually I'd like to visit Israel. I feel very strongly about the two-state solution, so eventually maybe that'll be part of my activism as well. So in a nutshell, that's my background. And yes, I was born in Uganda, East Africa, and so sorry I left that out. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Seif. It's a never-ending journey for all of us. So best of luck with your journey.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for sharing these profound and very personal stories. And I would like to ask each of our panelists in just a minute or so, what does it mean to you to belong to Road of Shalom? Let's start in the same order we went to. Mike?
Oh, okay. Well, listening to all these stories about belief and about sort of the tug of war between belief and intellect, and hearing what the rabbis and our clergy have put down, I'm reminded of a discussion I had after, I think it was after a Torah study with a congregant who took a very hardcore, still Jewish, right, but an atheist position, and it was Cantor Frankel who became sort of a de facto, moderator, responding to both of us. And while theologically we weren't that far apart, I said, to me, you have to choose something almost like an identity, and I chose to be a believer, not in a physical God, of course. I think that's magical thinking, but in a God that was present. In a lot of ways, it was present in those conversations and exchanges. And I feel like our clergy very much are devoted to dealing with each of us as people whose faith and self-definition are to be respected. And that there are many ways to encounter God in Judaism. Um, uh, so I've always felt supported in that. And I think that's one of the many things really that's special about Rodef Shalom. The other thing I would mention is that um, that Rodef has become a really important place in our family's life. I don't know if we hold the record, but mm, my wife and I both have been adult B'nai Mitzvah at Rodef, and all three of our children have. So it's a link that the five of us, no matter what my children do, Rodef, that sanctuary is going to be a link among the five of us. So I would say those two things.
That's great. Great story. Gail, what would you say Rodef Shalom means to you, and what has it meant to you?
I'll just sort of pick up the corner of this universe to say that I'm a little surprised to find myself at a Reform synagogue, but I look at it as a Reform synagogue has the sort of minimum belief, and then but then it's elastic after that. So whereas Orthodoxy or high conservatism have a sort of higher threshold of sort of where you have to start from and what you have to work with, I think Rodef Shalom is very open. I think that's part of what Michael was saying, but that it can tolerate and embrace many more expressions, higher, deeper, not using all the right words, but a greater amount of belief. It tolerates that, and that makes it comfortable for me. A place to learn. I love the transparency and the intellect that goes into most of its operations. That's why I'm here.
Thank you. Alice?
What do I like about Rodef Shalom? I think the same.
What does it mean in your soul to belong to Rodef Shalom?
My soul. No, I don't think it's my soul. I think it's the people. I love. I'm getting a message. Would I like to unmute?
Oh.
Am I muted?
No, you're okay.
Oh, I don't know why. Unmute myself. All right.
Yep.
I like the people. I like the progressive politics. I feel very happy about that with a group of people, who are active. I'm not, but I love what's going on at Rodef Shalom and all the support groups, and it's just a nice community to be part of. And yeah, I do feel, as Gail said, that there's just a lot of acceptance, or I feel accepted in just being honest about what I wonder about and what I believe, and that I'm able to talk to people about things that I'm thinking about without worrying that I'm not towing the line in a correct way or something like that. I like the openness of it.
Wonderful. Len?
Well, for me, it's the communal aspect and the people involved. The building is really secondary. I mean, I think I'm more enjoying getting more out of Rodef Shalom through Zoom. Alice and I would go to services Friday night 6 times a year. The occasion of our yahrzeit for our parents, and maybe a few other times. Now, it's very rare that we miss a Friday night, and when we miss it, we actually feel the loss.
You do.
I do. I feel the loss. I'm talking for myself.
I like it too.
I should talk about myself. And
It means
also,
more to Len.
and also the Torah in Saturday morning, it makes the Shabbat. I grew up in Ashkenazi, more significant day. It's not like every other day. It distinguishes it. So it's the people that are the community, and it's not a building. It's everything that's connected with the people.
I read a great book a number of years ago, if anybody has interest. It was called The Gift of Rest. It was written by Senator Joe Lieberman, who, while an Orthodox Jew, wrote just a fantastic book about separating the week with Shabbat, and even to get together with people for a pizza, but just to make sure you turn off your electronics and just to be together and have good conversation. It was great read. I loved it. It was called The Gift of Rest.
There's a Herman Wouk, that all of us know, as an author, wrote a book called This Is My God. And he was mentioning that during the rehearsals for his play, I just blanked out on the name of it. When things were getting a lot of pressure and attention on Shabbos, he would take off the day and come back on Sunday, and everyone kind of envied his freshness from taking that day off. Became Mutiny Trial was the play. So I don't think that's that unusual to feel that separation, change.
Yep. Well, keep enjoying Shabbat, and hopefully we'll all do it together before too long on North Broad Street. Seif, in a minute or so, what would you think? What is it that's making you feel great about Road of Shalom?
So I'd say, I guess for me, the question is, my interpretation of the question, right, is to answer it. The Road of Shalom is a good representative of the reform movement, right? As I mentioned earlier, the plan was for me to convert and join, GJC, a Jewish Germantown Jewish Center. But there's a certain reason, I don't have to be bashful about it. Normally, I like say it in cryptic ways, but basically, as a guy, you can probably guess something that like the conservatives insisted on. And so that's originally why I came to Road of Shalom. But the concern that right there is just to me a metaphor of like how the reform is more open to just. The more open you are, the closer you let people in, and so the more diversity you'll have, right? So for me, that's just what I love is the activism. GJC is very liberal as well, by the way. Their politics, they're very, very, like really, there's very little difference between our politics and theirs. Pro LGBT, pro social activism, and that kind of thing. But the reform movement for me is just very. It's that open door policy of like just we don't care how you look like or who you are or whatever your background is, come, like just I enjoy it, and the rabbis here are great. As somebody mentioned, the transparency is great, but I feel like other synagogues also have that. I enjoy that, the shared governance aspect of the fact that we know what's in the budget, and it's a very egalitarian community. I love it. So maybe those things that we share with other synagogues, but there's some things that are unique to us, like the warmth and the love of the community is just, for me, I've really felt it, and I love it, and I'm in the right place.
Wonderful. Thank you. Before we transition to closing out the session, are any comments or questions from our participants today? Okay. If you think of something, I guess you can electronically raise your hand and maybe we'll have a little time to jump back. We've all learned quite a bit today, and if I might summarize, it's the knowledge that when we congregate and pray together at Road of Shalom, we all have very diverse history and background stories, yet we feel as one in our Jewish community and home. Sometimes we see fellow congregants and say hello, and there's a certain warmth without really knowing what that person is all about, or even the notion that they have a certain experience that brings them toward their Jewish journey. I'll bet that this has been the story of Road of Shalom since its founding in 1795. Let me say thank you to our panel, our tech angel, and everyone that participated today. Thank you, Ellen and Gail, for thinking of me to moderate this. And a special shout out, Gail, for coaching me through my first panel moderating experience. It felt daunting much of the way, but I'm better having gone outside of my comfort zone. And I feel a tarragon chicken in my future. Everyone, please take some time to fill out the feedback form that RS will be sending in an email to you after class. Your comments help us grow and improve the Days of Learning experience. Days of Learning continues through this coming Friday, April 30th. Check the website, roadofshalom.org, for the full list of classes. Everything is there. Zoom will remain open for another 15 minutes for any of our presenters who wish to stay. Would be most appreciated during this unmoderated and open forum. Before we open the forum, though, Vivi will put the covenant of interaction statement on the screen for all to see, which I will recite. As we engage in conversation, we intend to listen and learn from each other. Please read and observe the following covenant of interaction, designed to help us ensure that the impact of our words is as positive as our intention in speaking them. Respect. All of us are here for a common purpose, and I will treat everyone with respect. Listening. I will be aware of how much space I am taking in a discussion and will balance how much I am talking with how much I am listening. Thank you, everybody. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too.